Welcome back. Now let's talk about budget deficits and public debt, and specifically what are the problems, what can go wrong, and how should we think about it. So remember that budget deficits are a tool of fiscal policy. So if you are going to allow budget deficits, you're going to allow for the federal government to help stabilize and stimulate the economy. If you're going to require an annually balanced budget, as most states do, and some people want the federal government to do, you're going to lose the ability to help during a recession. And what Keynes wanted, the inventor of macroeconomics and fiscal policy, was to balance the budget over the business cycle on average, so that during recessions you could run deficits, but during expansions you should be running surplus, and over the long haul it would be balanced. However, we've noticed that politicians and the people that vote for them rarely love to see tax increases, and they also don't love to see their programs get cut. So you could say, sort of because of the short-run nature of politicians and the voters that vote for them, we tend to lack the discipline to run a balanced budget over the long haul. We tend to run deficits much more often than surpluses, even when we're out of recession. One of the things that many Americans worry about is the long-run implications of these deficits, because they do add up and we still owe them, right? So Greece faced this sort of vote of no confidence in the middle of the financial crisis when they had to borrow a bunch of money because they're in recession, and they borrowed so much, right? This is how governments fund their deficits, is they borrow from people that are willing to loan to them. They borrowed so much that the lenders began to worry about the solvency of Greece. Basically, they worried that they might default or fail to pay back their debt. And so they started lending only on the condition that Greece pay them a higher interest rate. Just as you see for higher risk loans generally charge a higher interest rate, that's what the lenders were asking from Greece. And Germany is here to show you what a very safe economy, whom investors trust implicitly to always pay back debt. The interest rates that Germany was able to get away with were very low. And what happened is Germany, as part of the European Union, so is Greece, they helped bail German debt out. They helped sort of stand behind Greece's ability to pay back, and that's when you saw Greece's interest rates come back down. People realized it was going to be safe because we had the backing of Germany. This is not without danger and real societal costs. So Germany imposed on Greece austerity. One of the conditions of the European Union helping out Greece was to impose tax increases and spending cuts to get the budget balance back closer to zero out of such high levels of deficit. And to do that during a recession is problematic and very, very painful, especially for the most vulnerable. So the Greek far-right parties gained power and, in a sense, helped destabilize Greece and perhaps the entire European Union. Luckily, for most countries, default is never a real threat. At least it's never been in the U.S. so far. The U.S. interest rate on its public debt, or the rate that the federal government has to pay to people that lend it money, is very low, almost zero, showing that investors inherently trust the U.S.'s ability to pay back debt. But there are other issues. So some of the other issues is that when the government borrows money, it is borrowing from basically a fixed pool. And so when it's demanding these funds, it crowds out some of the private borrowing. At least that's one of the sort of worries. And another concern is that this default that we've talked about, although the U.S. doesn't seem to have been in that danger yet. And a third worry you could say is that, well, one of the solutions for government when it runs too high of a debt, it can just print money to pay the bills. Germany did that in the interwar period. But of course that can lead to high levels of inflation or hyperinflation. Not a good thing when your money becomes inherently worthless and you have to start over with a new currency. So let's talk about that crowding out idea. So conservatives especially use this as one of the arguments against running deficits. It should be noted that you cannot predict the size of a deficit high or low by looking at the party of the president in power. So it's not necessarily true that higher deficits belong with Democrats, as some would guess. In fact, the highest deficits in recent times have been, they've been due to recessions. But in non-recessionary times, we have high debt during Reagan's time. George W. Bush also ran up debt after Bill Clinton ran a surplus in the late 1990s. But back to this critique. Is it a good critique? The government borrowing always crowds out private investment spending. It is true in context. It's true part of the time. It depends on whether the economy is depressed. Are we in a recession? Then nobody's borrowing. And so government can borrow and not crowd out investment spending. In fact, investment is the most volatile of all the categories of spending in the U.S. And that's businesses looking ahead to see whether it's worth it or not to spend $10 million on that new warehouse. Of course, it is definitely not during a recession. So we see that private investment actually drops precipitously at the beginning of most recessions or even before. So one of the ways that government can step in is to step into that investment and do public investment, maybe infrastructure works, maybe something else that's going to use up that money that's not being borrowed by anybody at the moment. So Obama's Recovery Act of 2009 was a case in point. It was historic high levels of government borrowing, but U.S. interest rates, which are a sign of how trustworthy lenders think the U.S. government is, interest rates stayed very, very low, signaling that everyone believed there would be no problem for the U.S. government paying back all of its debt. This fear about debt, or someone would call debt or deficit hawks, spreads to Europe. In fact, Europe is much more anti-debt than the U.S. is, especially since they all adopted the common currency called the euro in 2000. So to make sure that countries weren't running away with too much debt and destabilizing the whole region, they were forced to agree to never allow their deficit to go above 3% of their country's GDP. And so, of course, this limited what they could do during recession. So this became an issue, right, as the whole area fell into recession in 2008-2009 global financial crisis. And here's the interesting thing. There were investors getting scared about not just Greece, but Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Italy. The investors began asking for high interest rates and were freaking out that these countries wouldn't pay back their debt. But here's the funny thing. Ireland and Spain were running surpluses. So there's a lot going on. Using the interest rate as the only judge of whether or not a country is safe from default is not a good idea. How about the U.S.? Did we escape that trap? No. 49 out of the 50 states require balanced budgets every year, but the federal government does not. So, why is this a bad idea to have a balanced budget every single year? Well, for states, they had to slash spending and raise taxes, do the austerity thing that Greece was forced to do in the face of recession, which actually makes the federal government have to work even harder, spend more money to undo what the states are doing to their own economies, to get the unemployment rate back down, to get GDP back up, requires a ton of money. And a lot of it is down to balanced budget rules in state legislatures. This isn't always a bad thing. It's nice to have the federal government be in charge, have a unified fiscal policy for the entire nation, although, as we all know, we have a very large country, and some parts of the country don't need the same thing as other parts. So it might actually make more sense for Nebraska to have its own fiscal policy that's distinct from California, because there might be very different conditions on the ground. But that's a debate for another day. And postscript to the European situation, they have since changed to a more flexible rule. There are some things coming down the chute to be worried about. We have an aging population, as do a lot of rich countries, And this means that our implicit liabilities, the promises that we've made, for instance, to our retirees in Social Security payments, are a problem because we have a giant baby boom population that is turning from taxpayers to Social Security recipients and no longer taxpayers. So this is going to be a very large problem for most countries. But it's not unsolvable. Just requires honesty and compromise and clear thinking. Here's a look at some of the CBO's projections for these things. And one more thing. How did that austerity work out for Europe? Not so well. Fiscal policy does move GDP in the right direction. So when you cut spending and increase taxes, austerity, because you're worried about high levels of debt during a recession, you actually make your economy slow down. And when you slow down and people have less incomes, guess what? Your tax revenues will drop and more people will fall below the poverty line and need assistance. And so you're actually going to make your debt problem perhaps potentially worse. And certainly you'll climb out of that recession in a slower manner. That is the mainstream economic thinking. It was challenged a little by austerity advocates, conservatives usually, in both the US and the Europe, especially Europe. But they have since sort of backed away a little bit, although in the COVID crisis we're seeing some of the austerity advocates come out of the woodwork again. But for the most part, austerity is a fine idea perhaps during good times, but most economists would say it is a crap idea during recessions, absolutely. So there you have it, a little walk down the lane with philosophy and problems with the deficit and debt.